Hello and welcome to Why Design is Hard. Having a moment of technical difficulties trying to get Mr. Baxley to join. Just give me 1 second to try and sort this out for you all. Let's see. Boom, boom, boom. Try here. Okay. I just sent another invite through our lovely Substack system. So just give me 1 second. And
Okay. Does that work?
Baxley,
Berkun,
welcome.
how are you?
I am lovely now that you are here.
That was a little
Because
dodgy
if
there
you were
for a
if you were
second.
if you were not he as I was, in the moment of uncertainty, the liminal space, I'm thinking, "I have all my questions for you, but if you don't show up, can I, like" 'cause they do the whole thing that happened during the pandemic where people play both sides of, like, the video they're making, I'm like, "Can I do that for Mr. Baxley?" And I'm thinking, like, I can maybe do it for a few minutes, but I'm very relieved that you have arrived.
Substack is a little confusing for these things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, without further ado, we have a bunch of folks here already. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining this live event. It's really a special thing because Baxley and I have a long history of friendship and professional colleagueship. Is that a word? Well, I'm a writer. We can say it's a word. But what I want to do here in this session is talk about this very important idea of courage and courage, how it applies to creative people and designers in particular. It's a word that doesn't come up a lot in design education. It doesn't come up a lot when people are trying to figure out how to become better designers. We talk about craft, we talk about how to brainstorm and develop ideas, and we have all these values. But courage is this word that means a lot to me. And in the book, Why Design is Hard, and for you folks on the Substack, it's a term that's come up a lot. And so, what I'm going to do, I'll briefly introduce Mr. Baxley, and then we'll get into it and try to explore the value of this idea of courage and hear from Mr. Baxley about what that means to him and how that's been a valuable thing in his career as a leader. So let me introduce Mr. Baxley. Mr. Baxley, this is official bio from his press team. Bob Baxley is a design leader who has shaped products used by billions at Apple, Pinterest, Yahoo, and ThoughtSpot. During his 8 years at Apple, he led design for the online store and the App Store and witnessed the iPhone's transformative launch while working under Steve Jobs. A student of history turned software craftsman, Bob discovered his calling after exploring photography, filmmaking, and music, ultimately recognizing software as the most powerful creative medium of our time. Bob champions the moral obligations designers have to reduce frustration in people's daily digital interactions. So thank you, Mr. Baxley, for joining us and joining me today.
Thank you, Mr. Berkun, but I think we're
Okay.
going to have to get on a first name basis now.
All right.
So we're just
All
going to
right.
cut to Scott and Bob.
Fine.
I
Fine.
see a few people in the chat that I know, so it's nice to have you guys here. Good to see you, Kat.
You're already courageously taking over this conversation,
Okay.
Bob.
I apologize. My video keeps freezing up, so I apologize in advance, but we're just going to keep rolling.
We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll with it. So, as I just riffed on briefly, the courage. Let me set you up with an easy setup. The way that I experienced working on UX in the world was that even though I was trained in user experience and I knew a lot about how to develop ideas don't really go anywhere on their own. And somebody has to be the champion of an idea in a meeting, in a conversation, on a project. Somebody has to champion an idea for it to go anywhere. And I think I'm going to offer you a premise and then you can debate it, slice it up, agree with it. It's going to be up to you. But for an idea to go anywhere, someone has to have conviction around that idea and put some energy or some of their reputation behind it for it to go anywhere. And so how do you put the idea of courage into your view of what good designers do?
So I'm going to go on a bit of a yarn here because it's worthwhile. It's
Okay.
a great story, and it's one of my favorite stories from the Apollo program, and everybody loves this Apollo stuff. Hey, Scott Jensen, good to see you. We now know how people go to the moon. They take 2 spacecraft. One of them's lighter weight. That spacecraft undocks from the heavier weight spacecraft, lands on the moon, comes back, docks with the heavier weight spacecraft. They get rid of the lightweight spacecraft. They use the heavy spacecraft to get back into Earth's atmosphere. That's known as lunar orbit rendezvous. There's 2 spacecraft that rendezvous in lunar orbit, hence the name Lunar Orbit Rendezvous. It's the only way we've ever landed to the moon. It is the plan for how we will land to the moon in the future. It is the only way we know to land on the moon. But in 1962, when President Kennedy announced that we were going to the moon, it was not clear yet that that was the way to go to the moon. And the idea of lunar orbit rendezvous had been floating around since the 1920s when a Ukrainian polymath was imagining how to go to the moon. His name was Yuri Kondratyuk. And in the 1920s, he was asking not like, how do you go to the moon in sort of a fictional Jules Verne way, but how do you actually go to the moon? And he figured out that the entire problem was an engineering problem that had to do with weight. And you had to have a lightweight spacecraft to get on and off the surface of the moon. He wrote that in a paper, and then it just sort of sat dormant from the 1920s until the 1960s.
For 40
And the
years, this
40
idea
years, right?
went nowhere.
This idea just sits out there in a little known paper. Sadly, he actually ends up getting killed in Stalin's gulags, but that's another tragic tale. But the idea lived on.
Oh, I was hoping to be some redemption for Yuri, but
Sorry.
Yuri never got to
No,
see his idea.
yeah, Mr. Kondratyuk never saw it come to fruition. But the idea lived on. And then around 1962, when President Kennedy announces the moon program at Rice University, there's a hot debate inside NASA as to how we're going to go. And there's three different ideas. One is what's called Earth Orbit Rendezvous. Send two spacecraft into Earth orbit. You rendezvous in Earth orbit, and only one spacecraft goes to the moon and then comes back. There's a second idea, which was called direct descent. You build a big, gigantic rocket, you fly that whole thing to the moon, you land that big thing on the rocket, and then bring it back. The problem with direct descent is that by the time you land on the moon, the rocket's about 100 feet tall because it has to carry so freaking much fuel. And so it wasn't really clear how the astronauts would ever get down the thing and back up. Interestingly, that was the idea that was championed by Wernher von Braun, who had designed the Saturn V rocket, and everybody's favorite Nazi designed the V2 rockets in World War II as well. but von Braun is, a central character in getting us to the moon. So von Braun's a heavyweight inside NASA. He is the show inside NASA. And so there's this idea of a direct descent. But there's an administrator inside NASA named John Hubbold. John discovers this paper by Yuri Kondratyuk, and he begins to realize that this is not a way to go to the moon. It is the only way to go to the moon. And he starts championing this idea around NASA, but nobody's really listening to him because he's going against what the heavyweights want to do. He has to go through repeated meetings, like when you look at it, many, many meetings. And he's just getting told over and over, no and no and no. But he knows that this is the idea, and he keeps fighting for it. He eventually reaches a point of frustration where he writes what's known as the most famous memo in the history of NASA. It begins with the phrase, somewhat as a voice in the wilderness. And then he goes on for about 14 pages, sort of saying, do we want to go to the moon or not? And he describes why lunar orbit rendezvous is the only way to go to the moon. He goes through all the math. He describes the program, how it would work. He calculates the weight of what was then known as the lunar schooner. And over a period of meetings where he's really put his job on the line, because I forgot to mention the memo, somewhat like a voice in the wilderness, went to the top brass at NASA. He completely went around his management chain, which is not what you did.
Whoa.
Yeah, that is not what you did in NASA in the early 1960s. And as you know, eventually the idea wins out. Wernher von Braun acquiesces. People realize the genius of lunar orbit rendezvous, and that's how we land on the moon in July of 1969. And so I always look at that story as a great example of design leadership, because I can submit to you that Yuri Kondratyuk designed how you go to the moon, that he designed how you would do a lunar mission. And then he wasn't really around to champion the idea. So John Hubbold was not championing Yuri Kondratyuk. He was championing this idea. And he put his job on the line because he believed in the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he didn't randomly believe in the idea. This isn't just a taste thing. This isn't some ethereal creative impulse. He knew the problem set. He knew the challenges that were involved, and he knew the solution. And he just went to the mat for it and eventually won. And so I kind of often think of that as maybe the best story I've ever come across of creative courage. And somebody, again, kind of putting it all on the line for a particular idea.
Okay, so I want to break down that story. So it's a good example of someone who, I like the fact, given my dark sense of humor, that the person who had the idea it sat around 40 years, then died. So it's kind of
Yeah, Stalin's gulags, yeah.
given the history of ideas, this is actually the most common way where ideas go. We give so much attention and survivorship bias to the successful innovation stories, but for the most part, ideas don't go very far. But in your story, you called out a few things that I want to break down here. So there was some moment for what was it? I forget. Is it Paul? What was his full name?
John Hubbold.
John Hubbold. So
Yep.
for John Hubbold, let's try to contextualize this for designers, for all the people listening here. You work on a team, there's a bunch of stuff going on. For John Hubbold, there was a moment when he was the person in the room who realized something that everyone else didn't see and had intuition or knowledge or experience to recognize we need to go in this direction. Everyone's going west, but that's wrong. They're all wrong. People are going to die. We need to go east. So there's a first moment of insight. And I think designers generally feel like they are the insightful ones, that they are in the room and have knowledge or perspective that others don't have. I think where this conversation about courage gets interesting and important is what to do in that moment. And in the story you described, it's a heroic story where we know the outcome, where John Hubbold, I'll get his name right eventually, John, we're on first name basis, John had the conviction or the confidence or the political capital to go against the grain. He felt that he could do that and had the skills to do that and was willing to take the risk. But I hear in my head, as you're walking through that story, when you're in that moment, the choice to have conviction and to be courageous, it's a lot of work. Like it's a bunch of extra work to go
Yeah.
and argue with people. So what is
Yeah.
the argument for doing it? Like should you stick your neck out if you're in a room full of people that doesn't see the way?
Well, it depends on whether you care.
Especially if like people are not gonna be and they're not gonna be receptive to it at first.
Well, look, we should be clear that I don't have any reason to believe John Hubbold had a lot of political capital
Okay.
available to him. So it's like he wasn't hiding behind that. In my career, I think I've had that in some instances because I'd built up some reputational chits that I could spend in certain scenarios. Like I'd kind of developed trust what's inside the organization.
Mhm.
So people would trust me in a different way. But, NASA at that point in time is under tremendous pressure and it's a very engineering driven culture. So I don't think anybody got political points. I think they got points for proving their case. John, to what you were saying is John had tremendous persistence and conviction, and courage and conviction I think are sort of two sides of the same coin.
Mhm.
Like you have got to be committed, and being committed means that you really care, like you really fucking care,
Yeah.
and you're willing to risk your job over this thing. And I think that's a critical part that has come up in my design career as well. And I can tell you, in my last job at ThoughtSpot, and I wish I had learned this earlier in my career, is that one of the signs of truly being an executive is that you stop thinking about what the organization wants you to do, and you start thinking about what you want the organization to do. If that makes sense, you flip it away. You flip it around. If you are in a posture where you're worried about getting fired, then you're automatically tentative and you're automatically cowardly. And so you have to have the guts, you have to have the economic foundations. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to be, at your back. But if you really care, you have to be willing to go to the mat for your ideas. And at least in my experience, and I'm sure there are plenty of exceptions to this, but in
Well,
my experience, the organization actually respects that more because that's what executives do. They take risks in arenas of uncertainty, you know?
yeah, so let me try to frame this in a particular way.
Yeah.
So what you just described makes sense to me about that level of courage. I'm gonna call that level of courage on a scale of 1 to 10, like level 10. Like if you believe enough in an idea, you're like, "You know what? I can lose my job and hurt my career. I care so much." And there's many noble stories in the history of design and innovation where but to me, that's level 10. And I'm thinking for this conversation, I wanna spend time at, like, level 2, which is I'm in the room, I see some stupid thing that everyone's gonna do, they're wrong, I have design knowledge and expertise, and I gotta decide what to do in that moment. And this courage that can be offered this courageous or, intentional acts that could be taken that are not that risky. It just requires someone taking the initiative. And so the simple example to me, and you and I have talked about this before, Bob, of just being in the room and there's a conversation that's going the wrong way, someone has to be willing to say, and I think I wish designers did this more. Hey, you frame this question this way. I think it's much better if we frame the problem this way. And let me go to the whiteboard and let me just give me 30 seconds. I'll show you how to frame it in a better way. And that doesn't risk your career or your job, but it does in the room take initiative to offer a better way to have the conversation. And in my framework for why design is hard, and part of where I want to go, at least for some time in this conversation, are those simple, basic actions that are not really that risky, but for some reason, I think design culture undervalues and doesn't focus as the key actions that allow for better work to happen. So that to me is like courage level 2. Maybe it's not even courage, it's just initiative, where the
No, I think
stakes
there's a
are
certain
not
amount of courage to
someone
it.
going like
I
landing on
I
the moon or
I
not.
wanna
It's
go
just
back to your premise. Like, I don't
okay.
think fighting over your job is level 10 courage. I think it's level 5 courage. Level 10 is putting your life on the line. That's a little bit different
Okay.
ballgame. So let's
Alright.
just keep courage
Alright.
in the spectrum.
Okay.
We're talking about, putting your
Fair enough.
job on, it's level 5. So,
Okay.
but you're talking about at a lower level, and I like the point that my good friend Scott Jensen made here in the comments, because he's right that if designers just lead with passion, you won't get anywhere. It can't just you can't prove that you're the most committed by simply being the most emotional, right? Like that's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
The thing that I find compelling about the NASA story is that John Hubalt understood the problem, and in his document he went through all the math. It was not some random insight he had. He saw the problem in a fresh way. To your point, he saw the problem in a fresh way. He had a different way of framing it, and then he knew every nook and cranny of the problem, so he could explain to people why the solution would work because he had fully accounted for all the factors. And I think a lot of times when I've seen designers go to the mat, there's tremendous number of engineering contingencies or business issues or things like that that they're not calculating on for whatever reason. To your question about what is kind of level 2 courage, some of it is it's just saying something, it's questioning it. Is this, have we really thought this through? And if you're a junior designer and you're in a room with a bunch of more senior people, that's difficult to do in that environment. What I found useful is if you start with a question. So instead of saying, this looks wrong to me, you might ask, why is it this way?
Mhm.
And from that posture, you can look sort of innocent in a way. You can look maybe naive. So it catches people off guard a little bit because it makes you seem less threatening. And it's kind of if you approach the proposed solution with genuine curiosity, you put the other people in the room in the position of having to explain
Yeah.
how they got to that point. And in the process of having to explain it, if it's not a good solution, it's most likely that they're going to start to stumble over their explanation. And in that way, you're going to have revealed the weaknesses in the argument, which may open the opportunity for you to slide in another solution.
Yeah, I love a word that you just said. Curiosity to me is such a secret power in this whole conversation. It's a secret thing. I think designers are inherently curious people. That's why we enter this field because it allows us to be curious about people and how things work, psychology, and all of these overlapping ways to understand the world. But where designers fall into a trap is other people who don't know what we know, we tend to be very judgmental of them. We tend to be annoyed by people who don't understand the basics of user experience design or the basics of aesthetics. We tend to look down on them as being kind of like Neanderthals. And we're not curious about what they know. And
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's the more
that's
safe.
part of the stigma. That's part of why that word you just said. I think there is something courageous in being curious because it means that you have to put aside your own ego. If I'm in a room full of people that I have to work with, and maybe they're not that bright, like maybe they're really not the sharpest, but I have to work with these people and I want good work to happen. The way it's going to happen, the courageous thing is what the example you gave was a good one. Is instead of judging them or being annoyed or like, guys, we're using this stupid font. Like instead of that attitude, to be, can you explain to me like why you chose this and do it in
Mhm.
an authentic way? Is super courageous and it creates space for them to be authentic, and then you can get somewhere. And that to me is a kind of basic um, skill that's still underdeveloped in the design community. I think it's still a weakness. It's still something that's like an afterthought of how we think what we think the real work is.
Yeah, well, look, some of the points you made there is I think it's hard for designers sometimes to appreciate that the people in other functions may be just as good at their function as you are at design. And you
Yeah,
see a little bit of this in the recent conversation where all the PMs think they're going to replace all the designers, and the designers think they're going to replace the engineers think they're going to replace everybody. And then as you dig deeper, you realize nobody really knows the nuances and details of everybody else's job.
right.
Uh, and so one of my big takeaways from Apple is that the first year you're at Apple, you get to go to a series of lectures by various executives. And so my first year, one of the executives that spoke was Johnny Ive. So we all, of course, went over to see Sir Johnny speak, and we all dutifully wore our black t-shirts and sat quietly in town hall. And of the many things he said that were memorable, one that really stood out with me was the secret to success at Apple was just to play your position, do the job you were hired for, and trust that everybody else was going to do theirs as well. And I really tried to carry that forward into other roles, into other jobs at other companies. Like, I ran design, that was it. I tried to be as clear as possible what I thought the boundaries were around that, and there were definitely boundaries around that. I was one function, one consideration amongst many that a CEO or a CPO or other people were having to make, and I just chose to believe that whoever was running sales and marketing and making executive decisions, that they were operating with, if not more information than I had, at least different information, and that they were making the best decisions available to them. And I could question those decisions, I could push back on them, but at some point I had to be a member of the team and accept that they knew what they were doing too. And then I'll augment that by saying one of the big takeaways that I learned at ThoughtSpot, which I think people could use a lot of other companies, is I hear designers complain all the time that their company doesn't really respect design or they don't understand design, something like that, and they get really frustrated because they don't feel like they're getting the support that they should get. But at ThoughtSpot, I had that same frustration, and then after about a year and a half, it dawned on me that nobody at the company outside of the design team had a clue what we actually did.
Yeah,
Because as designers, we always met just with designers.
right.
And why would these people in sales or marketing have any idea what product designers were doing? You
Right.
know,
Well,
we
yes, exactly
what
right.
let me finish. And then
Well,
and then the whole problem is
you're on my
compounded.
show right now, Mr. Baxley.
Hang
So
on. So the problem is compounded because when designers finally show something to the rest of the company, it's all complete and tight and polished. And if it's really good design, what gets shown seems perfectly obvious when you first see it. And so the viewers of it, it feels obvious to them. And so they kind of think to themselves, like, really? It took you 6 months to do that? It's obvious. So we started this program where we made a video, about a 20-minute video every week that we sent out to the whole company, where we showed the work that was happening in the different design groups. And we showed totally formative work. We showed some stuff that was getting close and polished and stuff, but we also showed like really rough stuff. We started showing all the discarded ideas. We let people in the room, so to speak, so they could hear the debates and the kind of questions we were wrestling with. And it was a sea change in how the company thought about design. And it showed up within just a few months where I was at a sales conference and some of the salespeople would just come up and start talking to me out of the blue. I had no idea who they were in a lot of cases because they weren't wearing name tags or anything. And this one conversation in particular is quite memorable because the guy I was talking to suddenly apologized and said, "Oh, you have no idea who I am, do you?" And I'm like, "Nope, not at all." And he goes, "Well, I know you from the videos. We
mhm.
watch those every week. They're incredible." Um, and so right up by shortly thereafter, the sales team was routinely inviting me as the head of design into sales meetings to help close the deal because the company was competing on design. But we only kind of were able to open that up by letting people in and seeing what the design team was actually doing.
This was at Apple?
No, this was a ThoughtSpot.
At ThoughtSpot,
So
okay.
I think that's a certain type of courage as well. The designers, they often try to keep stuff close to the vest until it's some level of perfection. But again, what happens then is that denies the people who aren't designers.
Yeah.
It denies them the opportunity to see the challenges that we deal with when we start with a blank page.
Yeah, yeah. There's a double-edged sword there. A lot of designers have had bad experiences with everyone else. There's reasons why some designers are so protective, but I agree with you, that works against them in the long run because most of the world designers are a super minority in the world. In the professional world and in the wider world, it's a very narrow,
Yeah.
tiny group of people, but we presume that other roles should have a basic knowledge of what we do, even to your point, when we're not the ones providing them with insight into how we work. We expect it to be
Well,
like a
it's not like
magic
we
trick.
have any idea what the hell they do.
True, right, yeah.
Do
right?
we really know what the finance department does?
No, but we presume that we're the most important role, so, like, it can't be that hard.
Yes.
Like, it's like not Dunning-Kruger, it's like, it's just the fundamental attribution error that we assume the same thing that they do. We assume we're annoyed they think we're irrelevant, and we think what they do is irrelevant.
Yeah.
I had a question for you, a scenario for you. So here's a story from earlier in my career, and I think a lot of people. Well, was never a design manager, UX training, but I was always like a project lead kind of person. So my role was to lead cross discipline teams. And there's a story I remember. It happened many times where I would be in a conversation, a design conversation with my UX people, two designers and a user researcher. We're trying to figure out a problem we're trying to solve, and it involves engineering at some point. But it's just me and the UX team, and we come to some understanding of what has to happen. And what has to happen is the engineering team is going to have to make some changes they don't want to make. And we all know the engineers, but we're discussing it. And okay, someone's got to go down the hall and talk to Jeff. And Jeff is not the most fun person to talk to, but someone's got to do it. And as the project lead, invariably, people make me do these things, and that's fine because it's part of my job. But I also know the more time designers spend talking to engineers, the better respected they will be because
Yeah.
learn how to your point, they will both learn the nuances of what each other care about. And I happen to believe that designers and engineers share a lot of similar kinds of pride about quality of work, about aesthetics, so that they use that word in a different way. They really do care about craft. And when that link happens, now what designers want, they can get. But in this particular conversation, I could not get anyone on my UX team to go talk to Jeff. They were like, why should I have to do that? And I'm like, well, you don't have to do it, but
You get to do it. What are you talking about?
well, but that's when you have roles like at Microsoft at the time, you had roles like mine,
Yeah.
project leaders who are meant to be the coordinators and negotiators. But I looked at this is a self-defeating choice. That as a designer, you should want to be in that room. You should want to be the person talking to the engineer. You should want to have the courage to be on theme for this live session, to get in there and put your own stake in sorting out the problem, because now you become the point of contact. Then if there's a follow-up question, who are they going to go to? They're going to go to the designer instead of coming to me, which often designers complain, why does the engineer always go to the PM? That little loop is part of why. So I wonder, in your experience, you've managed a lot of designers. If you had a designer who was very good, but was similarly resistant to having those conversations, what feedback would you give them? What coaching would you give them about how to handle that situation? Would you take my side of it? I'd be like, you got to have these fights for yourself, or would you take a different approach?
Well, I don't think it's as simple as you have to have these fights for yourself. I think,
And
well,
I'm being dramatic about fights, right? It's really
sure.
about
Yeah, no, no, I know. So
yeah.
look, the first thing I'll say, and I'm on record in other environments saying this, is that design and engineering should be the same group. This idea that design is reports into product management and that's separate from engineering is just flat out wrong.
Mhm,
Design and engineering are combined making group.
mhm.
Design is engineering phase 0. They should think of themselves as a single team. Design should be at the beginning, engineering should be at the beginning, and they should both go across the goal line together.
Yeah,
This idea that design starts stuff and throws it over the transom, and then engineering has to get it across the goal line while design's on the next project, that's just bullshit. It doesn't work, right? So the two orgs need to be together. To your point, they have a very similar mindset in terms of how they approach systems, how they think about the entire ecosystem, how they want to make something fundamentally. They want to make something that they're all proud of.
mhm,
And with all due respect to my friends in product management, they are, by definition, it's in their job title, they are managers. Like they should sit in their own thing, managing, which is setting budgets and setting schedules and listening to customers and, determining the roadmap. But they should be involved in defining the problem and then be sort of uh, outside influencers to the solution. But I haven't had a lot of great experiences where product managers were deeply embedded in the solutioning, and I don't understand why. I don't. Well, I understand. I'm disappointed that we've landed in a place where design reports into chief product officers.
yeah.
I think the power dynamics there have completely disempowered design and been a great despair. It's greatly set back user experience, both for designers as a profession, but more importantly, I think for users.
Can, can,
I want to.
can you come back to the scenario of there's a
Yeah.
specific
So
designer?
I want to
You
get
say
back to
you're
your
yeah.
scenarios. There's two ways for me to talk about that. One is you said if that designer was on my team. So
Mhm.
if that designer was on my team, they would repeatedly find themselves in meetings with me and that engineer, and they would just be there,
Okay.
and I would build the connective tissue that way.
But you're
You know,
saying you would do that you would choose to do that once you knew there was a problem, so you could model.
yeah, like if I knew that that designer and that engineer needed to get
Oh, I see.
together
Okay.
and, and they needed to have a working relationship, you
Okay.
find ways to get them in contact with one another.
Yeah.
And I think you have to, ideally you find ways to get them in contact with one another in person. I mean, it's even better than live calls, but you've got to get out of the you got to get out of Slack and even out of
Right.
Loom and stuff. You got to find some way for real time conversation so they can see each other as fully three-dimensional human beings. Ideally, there you are able to encourage them to have a social relationship, excuse me, and just go to lunch together occasionally or start to build another level of rapport. I mean, another great example of my experience here when I was again back at ThoughtSpot, the company was largely based in India. And for the first 2.5, 3 years I was in that job, I couldn't travel because of the pandemic and the quarantine. I'm sure you remember the pandemic. It was pretty big news at the time. So I couldn't go to India. But eventually, and honestly, I was quite reluctant to go to India. I was a little intimidated by the whole thing. But eventually a situation came up where I needed to go to India. And being in the room with our team over there, with all the engineers and the product managers who I had gotten into a pretty frictiony kind of place with. I'd gotten to a pretty prickly place with some of those folks, which was easy to do on Slack. But when you got in the conference room together and you realize that everybody just wanted to build the best thing possible, that animosity kinda goes out the window. And eventually I got into a position where I was going over there. It's a little crazy. We went once a quarter to connect with the team over there. So I ended up going 7 times in 18 months, which was a little much. But, the key point is that we were in person together, working through problems together on a whiteboard. And that took care of a lot of the tension. What I've seen is that when tension builds up between designers and engineers, it's often just because they're not in the room together. And as soon as they get in conversation, and the thing with engineers can be challenging. Most engineers are incredibly intelligent. They're incredibly logical. They've been the smartest person in the class almost their entire lifetime. And designers can be intimidated by that. And designers, may get back on their heels because they're trying to discuss things from more intuitive, less precise way. But if the designers are producing really great work, I mean, I've never seen an engineer look at a truly great piece of design and not wanna build it. So I think that's the other thing that designers need to keep in mind. If you're getting resistance, it may well be that the idea is just not good enough, that it's not been thought through completely, it's not responsive to the engineering issues as fully as it could be. I mean, I had plenty of ideas across my career where we had an idea and it was 2, 3, 4 years before anybody picked it up. So if it's truly a great idea, they last. Even if the originator of the idea dies in Stalin's gulags, the ideas will stick around.
Yeah, in listening to what you were talking about, it made me think of, sometimes I pick on designers a lot. I feel a lot of criticisms about design culture. I do feel like in many organizations, there are valid complaints about how things are set up to make a designer's ambitions really difficult. We talked about one already, just the general lack of understanding what designers do. Designers are often, you talk about organizations, designers are often not central to how the core project runs, so they're told about things late. There's a bunch of things that work against designers. And so that is part of why the courage idea comes to me if someone has to take the initiative to work against those things and to try to find footholds where they have some traction to develop a reputation where their ideas can go somewhere. But it's not something that is um, taught to us about how to do that, about how to be the only designer in the room when you know no one really understands what you're going to do and how or what you're capable of doing and how you're able to earn the reputation is to speak up and have conviction. It's something that you're not really trained to do. The book I reference all the time is Leah Booley's book, UX Team of One. It's this fantastic example of design culture supporting education for how a solo individual designer can develop and grow their own reputation. I wanted to jump back to one other thing you said about designers and engineers, and it reflects design courage. That one theory I've always had about roles, when there's two roles that don't get along, design and engineering, it could be marketing and product management, doesn't matter. When two roles don't get along, like collectively, that almost always means that the senior leaders of each role don't get along. That the top of the tree, there's a dysfunctional element at the leadership level, and that just filters down. It's just a natural thing that filters down. And one observation that I had long have had, and it's not true for all design leaders, but that design leaders are relatively passive in organizations and tend to end up playing a service role. They have a service model for what their function is. And a service model conflicts with courage in a bunch of ways.
Totally. Yeah.
That service
It goes
model.
back to my first point about you have to be willing to go to the mat and stop worrying about your job. You have to be willing to believe in the idea and go around your management chain if necessary and
Oh,
champion the idea.
wow. This climate right now, I don't know that I'd advise anybody to take that many risks with their job for an idea.
Well,
I'd be advocating.
yeah, no, I said that earlier. I agree. Look,
I'm
I agree with
advocating
that.
courage
I
level
look,
2
I
and
agree
3.
with that. But
Yeah.
I also, in my experience, limited though it is, I when there's a lot of resistance to a design solution or design idea, it's often because the solution of the idea just isn't strong enough. And the designer, I've often you don't agree with me, that's
No,
cool.
no, I have
I mean,
mixed
and I
feelings
also
about
think a
this.
lot of times designers start to take it personally, and
Yes,
they start thinking that this is about me winning,
yes,
and you'll hear language like, "Well, I own this," or "I'm gonna go into this fight," or I mean, you go into this pugilistic
yes,
vocabulary around these things, and that's just an impossible posture for everybody.
I agree.
You need it to be a battle about the ideas,
Yeah,
and you need to find some way, and I know this is challenging, but you need to find some way that you can get in the room with the other players in the problem and go hard on the ideas, and then everybody kinda shake hands and go to lunch together afterwards. If
yes,
if it ever gets about me winning, then you're just in a I mean, that's just not a that's not a positive place to be.
yes. Matt and James, I see your question. I'll cue them up in just one second. I wanna finish off this point with Bob. The, what you just called out about defensiveness, I think is a really good thing to talk for us to talk about. There's something still lacking in the way we cultivate design skill about critique and what that means and the role that the designer can play in critique. And I think part of what you're describing, if you're in an argument with someone and they think your idea is bad, a healthy designer, a mature designer can hold the space for the possibility that they're right, that the critique is correct, but do it in a way where there's space for the alternative, that the conversation is a conversation about the space of ideas. And that's what a mature creative person can do. They can have a conversation with the possibility of the outcome of the conversation. Is this idea is really strong or this idea is really bad and weak? And we don't know yet until we go through the conversation. And both outcomes are fine. Both outcomes are good. The goal is to have the conversation. That's a mature creative person, a mature writer, a mature musician, a mature designer. That to me is a mature ability to be creative, is not to hold on to the judgment of the idea before you've had the conversation with another smart person with a different point of view. But I don't know how many times I've seen that done. I know I've worked with designers who can do that, but I don't. And I'm also like I'm old and I don't manage a team anymore. Maybe my opinions are relevant.
Curmudgeonly?
The audience can tell us about how many fellow designers they've seen maturely handle a conversation like that. But to me, the spirit of all the messaging of the why design is hard is that is the central skill. That skill is more important than your talent. Because if you're at talent level 5 out of 10, but your ability to have those conversations is a 10, you'll get maximum value out of your talent because you
Yeah.
will be comfortable in every conversation as opposed to the opposite. Your talent level's 10, but you suck at talking about like your talent will go nowhere because people will sense in 20 seconds of talking to you about your ideas that they can't talk to you. You're just too sensitive.
Look, well, look, I think this is something that senior designers and senior designers can coach younger people through. This is a very coachable behavior,
okay.
and it has to do with helping whatever level they are, helping designers understand that success is shipping work that everyone involved was proud of, right? It's not about a particular idea getting across the goal line. It's not about your personal paw prints. The best ideas, the best projects I ever worked on, nobody can remember who came up with what. So I think of, and I have a friend that talks about some design teams or some product comp teams operate like a factory and some operate like a guild, right? And most companies today operate like a factory. It's kind of an assembly line. The product moves down the assembly line.
Right.
Everybody's like, "This is my station. Don't impinge on my station." It's I'm doing my little thing. You do your thing. I don't care, but don't get in my space. And then there's guilds where everybody's kind of in it together, and we're trying to create this thing together. And when I think about a guild, I think about like a basketball team or like the Beatles. Like the Beatles aren't sitting around worrying about. I don't think they're worried that much about who's getting credit for what. I mean, John played piano, I think, on some songs, and I think Paul played drums on a couple of songs, and like everybody just kind of moved around to create the best thing they could. And it's
Yeah.
certainly if you watch great sports teams, there are players on any team who for them the whole model of success is simply winning the game. You know, if they have to play first base, they'll play first base. If they have to come in designated, they'll be designated. Like they'll do whatever. It's for the team to win. And so
Yeah.
I think you can coach designers into the idea that like, look, we're trying to create something that we're all proud of together. And that means going into these meetings, these critique meetings, it's back to what we said earlier with like a real posture of curiosity. I want to hear your critique because I want to make this work better. And what I have often found the most frustrating, I'm actually in a debate with one of my mentees right now about this, is when people start getting defensive about the work and they try to explain to me why it is the way it is. And when we were, again, when I was at Apple, but in other environments as well, I would always coach my team. When we went into a design review, our goal was not to defend the work. Our goal was to ask clarifying questions on a criticism. We already controlled 95% of the conversation because we were the ones bringing the cops into the room. Like we had already won simply because the whole debate was gonna be about stuff we came up with.
Right.
So, the position we should be in is just ask clarifying questions. Why were people responding the way they were? Like, take all that as input. Don't try to respond in the moment because 9 times out of 10, you're gonna be wrong and you're gonna be reflexive and emotional. Just like take the input, go back later, maybe don't think about it for a day, process it, and come up with another solution and try again next week.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. The one note I had was there's a story that designers tell, which is some truth to it, of doing some of these things where you do the extra work and then the credit gets taken from you because your visibility in the idea stream is low, because you're not in the rooms, you're not in the there's some truth to that. I don't think that justifies giving up. I think the way forward is getting better at these skills of persuasion and relationship building so that when you are adding value, you're better able to have yourself represented as having provided that value. I want to interrupt for a second. There were a couple of questions that have come up. I want to bring those into the room. So there was a question from Matt. He asked, he's reflecting on an earlier part of the conversation
Mhm.
about individual contributors and what an individual contributor designer who has some of these ambitions but doesn't work in a great organization of designers. His question was, are there successful ad hoc practices or things an individual contributor can do that helps designers work more closely with engineers than the official process might support?
Let me get to that in just a second. I just wanna go back to the point you made just a second ago about
Okay.
credit. I do
Yeah.
think people get really defensive because they're afraid they're not gonna get credit for something. And I would just encourage people to pause and ask themselves, what would they do if they didn't care who got credit? Because if your goal is to ship the best possible product possible because you truly care about your users, credit needs to be a secondary concern.
Except at review time when your boss, who's not a designer, says, "What did you do?"
Yeah,
And
but there's
and
but there's
and
ways
you
you can.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a
Look,
real thing. I think
all
that's
this
a real
hinges on
thing.
you having an enlightened boss. I get that. Um,
Yeah.
but that also means you need to go find an enlightened boss, or you
Yes,
need to become
but
an
a
enlightened.
lot a lot of the people watching this call are looking for an enlightened boss. They don't have one yet. They're hoping, Mr. Baxley, that you, in your worldly experience, can tell them something they could do today, which is what the
Yeah,
question is. And you offered a trail, you said, about
yeah.
relationship building. and
Well,
like
so I'll go
getting
back
off
to
the
James's thing.
digital.
Again, I also think running an influence campaign inside companies are filled with what they think are communication channels that we call Slack and Loom and tools like that. They're actually internal social media. And you can use those channels, especially tools like Slack and Loom. You can use those channels to communicate with anybody in the company or everybody in the company. There are environments where you're going to get slapped down if that you can go outside the bounds. But if you're creating a Slack channel that's like daily inspirations, or you're just posting a channel that's like an internal blog where you're just highlighting things you've seen, or you're sharing, your experiences of some tool that you're learning, like people inside the company are going to start to watch that, and you can do propaganda,
Yeah.
and you can run an internal influence campaign. Like again, we were really bullish on this at ThoughtSpot because we were spread out all over the world, and so we used Loom a lot to try to influence the company. In addition to making this weekly video I mentioned with what was happening in the different studios, we also had everybody on the team. There's about 20 designers on the team. Everybody on the team made a 1-minute video every day, talking about what they did that day and what they were looking forward to the next day. And so there was sort of this visible accountability that everybody. It was basically an async stand-up meeting. And
Yeah.
those videos were broadly available to everybody that was in the product management team, everybody was in the engineering meeting. And it just, it was us being more vulnerable and more open, and letting people see the kinds of things we were working on. And like once we kind of opened the room and let more people in, like just lots of great things started to happen. I
Yeah,
mean,
that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
I do think there's a link in here though that you were the design leader. Like part of why I wanted to have this conversation with you is I've always looked at you as someone who embodies a lot of these
Well, this
values.
Loom stuff was not my idea.
No, no,
That
I
was
know that. I know
somebody
that.
else on the team's idea.
What I'm
Yeah.
suggesting though is in the culture of the environment of what design means, including to your peers, your engineering peers, that's all set up and loaded by who the design leader is. I want to jump back to Matt's question because I think you gave advice
Well,
before that directly answers what he's asking for here. I think part of the secret to a lot of what designers want in this context, more capital, more influence, it comes back around to that word curiosity, Matt. So the advice that I would give you, Matt, which is based on what Bob said, if you have an engineer you're working with who just kind of ignores you, doesn't give you enough respect, you have to become curious about what they're doing and be genuinely interested about how they go about their work. Treat them like a customer and do user research on them and find out what they care about and what they value, what they think good work is. When they feel like you are genuinely interested in what they're doing, they will listen to you differently for that reason alone. Because in workplaces, most people don't give a shit about what most people are doing most of the time. If they feel like you genuinely are curious about why they wrote the code that way or why they have their certain process, that's just relationship building. And you have to be authentic about it. You can't be a phony schmaltzy, But if you're authentic, that's where you start, and that's where you'll find the connections between the kinds of aesthetics and care about craft that will be reciprocated. And also part of the curiosity is you may find a way to make the engineer's job a little bit easier when they're working for you about how you hand over your mock-ups. Not that anyone does mock-ups anymore, but you can always find a way to build a little bit of rapport. And it's that little gap that you find that opens that creates the next gap. And all of a sudden your best buddy and you're conspiring for how to do what Baxley's talking about for taking over the company in a hostile takeover where design and engineering run the show, which is really the
Well,
dream
look, I
for all of us.
also look. I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think in broad strokes, I do think that a room full of designers often has the highest EQ of the three main functions. Like I was at a design conference, about a 60-person design conference a couple of months ago, and it was like one of the highest EQ rooms I'd ever been in. And I think that designers actually have the ability to communicate and converse. We are, after all, professional communicators, and we potentially have some skills that many engineers may lack in that regard. Like if you just go and you approach them and and ask them like, how did you get into engineering? Why are you in
Those
engineering?
great
Like,
questions. Yeah, curious. Those are
what's your life like? Why are you here? Like, why are you spending your life energy working on code? What can we make together that you're going to be proud of and excited about? And over and over and over in my career, I've seen that when the design team came up with something truly great, and the engineering team has to feel part of it. They have to be kind of brought along in it, and see it as it evolves and have some influence on their own. Have some influence into the work as well. They need to feel like they're part of it as well. But if it's truly great and it's something they want to build, they will work like dogs. They will work in the middle of the night happily to bring that thing to life. But it comes
yeah,
back to, are you as a design team creating something that the rest of the org really wants to bring into the world. And that's on you. That's on the designers, man. Like,
Yeah,
I
I
hate to
agree with
say
that.
it, get better ideas, but get better ideas. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I agree with you. When I became a PM, I was a user researcher for my first year. I became a PM. I was excited. I thought now I'm a leader. Now my ideas will just people follow me because I'm the leader. And the first thing my boss told me as a PM, he's like, "We hired you, Scott, to do this. You're smart. You're technical enough. You have good communication skills. The number one thing we will evaluate you on is your ability to work and earn the trust of engineers." And when he told me that, I was really surprised. I was like, "What?" Like, I thought I'm in charge now. He's like, "No." He's like,
Yeah.
"Your job is to earn," he said, "earn, like, not
Yep.
fight, not
Yep.
yell,
Yep.
earn the trust of engineers." And that changed my view on what my job was. And that was why I could go down the hall to the difficult engineer and work because my whole framework was my job is to earn trust so I can be effective at persuading them to do stuff. There was a quote
I
someone
I I
said.
just
Go ahead. Yep.
I just wanna say quickly, like, the way I talk about this now is a hard-earned lesson. I spent a big chunk of my career in an adversarial posture with engineering, and I was a dickhead, and I deeply, deeply regret it. But I probably didn't really figure out how to befriend engineers until I was in my mid-40s, maybe
Mhm.
later. I'd probably been a design leader for 10 years by then. So I wish I'd learned it earlier. I think it's an important skill, but it's not necessarily the first place that people start from. Um
Here's a fun fact from James. I worked with a developer who kept pushing back against my designs. Then I learned that his bonuses were based on bug counts and explained that implemented. So sometimes there are structural things that are really
Yeah.
fucked up and they're not transparent, right? So then it's like you could have at least told me ahead of time, like that's what James felt. If I had known ahead of time, I wouldn't have wasted my energy. There was a term I wanted to bring to you, Bob. M. Sue mentioned I've embraced, Lauren Yarrow, I don't know who that is, the term "trusted agitator" as a design practice. Securing trust and I've never
Yeah.
heard that term before, but I love the combination of agitation is something designers are sort of good at, like, we're not effective agitators, but trusted is this really big word. So I wonder, does that term resonate with you at all? What does that mean for
Yeah,
you?
yeah, look, I think that's a great phrase. Trusted agitator is a great phrase. Look, the job of design is to see the world differently, to see around the corner in ways that people don't see it. Like you if you come up with a truly great idea, I think it's always gonna be met with a little bit of resistance because it's not going to be patently obvious right at the get-go, right? I mean, there's whole books about, whether or not art that's popular during the artist's lifetime is really gonna survive, because, stuff like truly great art is usually a little bit ahead of the audience. And if you're really if you're a designer coming up with bold ideas, they're gonna push people and gonna push them to think differently, you're gonna push the engineering. You're by nature going to be challenging, and I've told this to other design leaders, you're not gonna fit in with the rest of the executive team. Designers think differently, they see the world differently, that's why they're designers. They notice details at a different level, they can, like, nerd out about typography and all sorts of, key lines, and I mean, just ask a designer about a car and listen to how they talk about it versus everybody else. Designers will always see the world differently. And you can get frustrated about that and wish you had a seat at the table like everybody else and all that rest of the stuff. But like really the fact that you see the world different is your secret sauce. And I want to make one last point, which is nature of politics. Because I think when you were given the story of your boss, your experience at Microsoft and your boss saying you had to earn the trust of engineering, I hear people talk about office politics. And I think it's important to put kind of a definition around what we mean about a political organization. So, a political organization is one where the power rests with the role, not with the individual. So, you inherit the power of decision making because you sit in a particular position, not because of your abilities. So, if you think about electoral politics, they are by nature, by design, political because all the power sits with the office. The president holds the power because he is the president, not because of his abilities. Right. Now he had to have abilities to get into the role, but that's a different question. Right. In a non-political organization, the people making the decisions are the ones who are most expert at making at that particular area. And designers, even if they're in a political environment, designers often have skills that allow them to communicate and to both originate new ideas that are different from how everybody else is thinking, and then communicate them in ways that are professionally done and effective. And so designers have an ability to kind of make an end run around the political structure by simply coming up with great stuff. So I think you have to I think it's important to keep in mind that you don't get power, at least in design orgs, you don't get to be a leader, and you don't get power simply because somebody anoints you. You know, if you want to get power as a designer, it's up to what you can create. It's sort of like power in sports. You know, you get power in the NBA by being a good player. You know.
Yeah. We're almost at the top of the hour. The maybe a concluding thread here is you talked about designers and what we know is special. There's a fundamental notion about a job like design in that the job's about ideas, and if you're someone whose job is about ideas, your job is about change. That is what your job is. You're not hired for things to stay the same. Your job is to have better ideas. And the rub that you're not told in your training is that most people, most of the time, don't want change. They don't. No matter what they say, no matter what innovation books they read, people are conservative by nature, especially people in power, because they've earned that power, they fought for it, and they don't want to lose it. But designers aren't told that. So we show up with this bevy of ideas and change. We're like, why don't people want to change? We're surprised. We have it backwards. That being a career based on change means you will face resistance most of the time. And it's not because of your talent. It's not because you're not smart. It's not because you're not a good person. It's just the nature of people and the nature of organizations. And that's where courage comes in. If you're going to be if you want to be a person of ideas, and as a writer, I think of myself as a person with ideas, you're going to go into a world that isn't asking for them. Like,
Yeah, yeah, totally.
go and be persuasive, charming. That is the heart of being an effective creative person. It's not your talent. It's your talent manifested through the ways that you can influence people.
Yeah, and that's the job, and you just have to embrace it. That's the gig, you know?
So, Mr.
Okay.
Baxley, we're back to normal.
Hey, I just wanna say thank you to everybody on the call for joining. There's a lot of people here that I know, some that I don't know. I always like to call out folks that show up for these things because it means that you care. We work in a weird medium where none of us get to see our audience and our audience doesn't get to see us. Yet we are here and they are out there on the other side of the glass and they're counting on us to make products that they can use and then make their lives better. So, on behalf of the billions of people out there that are using the products you guys create, I just want to say thank you for showing up and caring and continue to put your creative energy and your life energy into trying to make the digital built environment a little bit better.
Well said. That makes me yeah, good job. Glad no, that's good. Good. All right, folks. Thank you all for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. If you had other questions for Bob, I can maybe sneak him into him after so you can leave a comment. But thanks for joining, and
Yeah.
I'll see you on the Substack. Have a good week,
Awesome.
everybody. All right.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.